Welcome to all our listeners. Welcome to the temporary fuel levy relief in SA and permanent crisis in the Kivus episode of Ubuntunomics podcast. This month we look at the Minister of Finance's application to extend the temporary fuel levy relief, the World Bank approval of $480 million to boost SA's COVID-19 response, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs' Nordic Roadshow, and the worsening security crisis between the DRC and Rwanda, slow progress on the ECOWAS reforms after coups in West Africa, and the heads of regional communities meeting in Tanzania. With me this month is Sbu Nyati from Sakombe Assets. Hello Sbu, how are you doing?
Hi, Desi. I'm well, thank you, man. It's been a hectic month, but we are keeping on.
Yeah, definitely, and we're in the thick of it now with winter and everything, but we have to keep it moving. So, without further ado, just a request and a reminder to our listeners on whatever platform you get your podcasts and you're listening to us through, hit the subscribe button so you can keep up to date on future updates and future episodes. And if you're enjoying this episode, hit the share button and share it with your family and friends. Without further ado, let's get started with the SA update this month. There's a lot happening, and in the SA update in brief, the MPC increased the repurchase rate to 4.7% in the 19th of May. The SARB introduced a new monetary policy framework on the 27th of May. And unemployment numbers decreased slightly to 34.5% in the first quarter of 2022. And real GDP increases to 1.9% in the first quarter of 2022, whilst mining production decreased by 4.3% on a month-to-month basis during April, as well as manufacturing production decreasing by 5.4% on a month-to-month basis in April. Meanwhile, current account surplus has widened to 2.2% of GDP in the first quarter of this year, and President Ramaphosa suspends public protector on the 9th of June. Any comments from your side, Sbu, on some of these brief updates and what's happening at the moment in South Africa?
What I can say is pleasing is that our current account surplus is looking pretty good, and the other thing is that there's a lot on the political front with President Ramaphosa, the farm gate scandal, as we have come to know it, and suspending the public protector is something that is raised quite a few eyebrows. But yeah, that's this. Anyway, the scandal keeps. Let me put it this way: this scandal looks like it'll get legs, but yeah, there's a lot that is being said out there in the public domain about it. Yeah, but anyway, on the economic front, I'm happy with the current account surplus.
Yeah. No, I think that's positive news, as well as our growth increasing, ticking up. My only slight concern is our production in mining and manufacturing decreasing quite significantly, around the 5% mark on a month-to-month basis. But other than that, it seems to be some slow progress and some slow improvement in the economic front. On that note, that takes us to the first story, the SA update on the extension of the temporary reduction in the fuel levy. And the Minister of Finance is requesting the tabling of a 2-month extension on the reduction in the general fuel levy until the 3rd of August. On the 31st of March, Minister of Finance and Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy announced a temporary reduction in the general fuel levy of R1.50 per litre from the 6th of April up until the 31st of May, in order to provide temporary relief to households from the rising fuel prices after the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And unlike the previous relief, though, this proposal for the extension is estimated to cost the government 4.5 billion rand from the fiscus, as it's not fully funded through the sale of strategic oil stocks.
The old adage, if horses were wishes, man, I would rather have a fuel levy subsidy of, say, about 4.50 per liter, and I would hold that for the duration of the Ukraine conflict. Not this temporary piecemeal review, which is unsustainable in my view. I
Sure.
mean, yeah, I mean, this relief will be halved for the second month to 75 cents per liter. That means from the 7th of July to the 2nd of August, it will be at 75 cents. But then again, one understands that Treasury must have defined timelines, limits. So I would, uh, we don't know when the conflict will end out in Ukraine, but I think they're doing it piecemeal, I think. My other worry is that transport costs have a direct impact on consumer goods prices and to businesses, most especially for household items and groceries, things like that. I mean, this will result in a cost of living that is high, and even the cost of doing business will be dramatically impacted. It will, in the end, reflect on inflation, consumer price inflation, and will lead to a recessionary economic environment, in my view. I mean, there are a number of suggestions out there floating, from people calling for a complete deregulation, to amend the existing Petroleum Products Act. Some are saying taxes must be scrapped completely on the fuel price. Some are saying we should revise the road accident fund levy to make up a lower total of the current basic fuel price. Um, some are even suggesting that we should import oil from Russia. So there are those.
Yeah, I've heard some of those comments coming through. We're going to import oil at strategically cheap prices. It's ridiculous, but yeah, it's actually very interesting where we are now because there's just so much uncertainty. I think the world was banking on the Russia Ukraine conflict not lasting longer than 3 months or at least being resolved quite quickly, but it doesn't seem like that is on the horizon. So yeah, it's really concerning, and I think the world is actually headed to a recession because we're all just under significant impact of the inflation, which is going to continue whilst the war plays on, and I don't see any policy intervention at a national level being able to resolve this issue of inflation and in a slow growth environment without the actual war in Ukraine ending in order to release. Well, even if it were to end tomorrow, I guess it'll take time to roll back some of the action taken in terms of sanctions, etc. But it's very concerning where we are, and it doesn't seem like there's any silver bullet response because I think South Africa would generally like this sort of single response for all the problems. We're not in that terrain. And I think, in any case, even if we were to put together a package of responses, they're only likely to materialize in the medium to long term, in my view, especially when it comes to the issues that are affecting us as a result of the Russia Ukraine conflict.
Yeah, you're right, Sia. Because the government has also suggested that they'd like to review the regulatory accounting system, their methodology for calculating petrol prices. But they say this would result in a decrease of about 1 rand 3 cents per liter. But that would be by 2028. So it means it would take too long, like you were saying, it would take too long to implement such changes, policy changes. Some are saying that the government should revise the road accident fund levy to make up uh, much less than the current 30% of the total pump price. But this will only be possible if at the Road Accident Fund, they come up with proper administrative changes and improve their efficiencies over the medium term. So even there's also the Automobile Association of South Africa, the AA, which have called for a general review of the country's petrol price, the way it's calculated. They're saying it's long overdue. We should be rethinking how we incorporate taxes in the price. Just generally, we should review the price methodology. So, but these are long-term solutions, nothing for the short term. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, the irony is that it must be a festival for the market fundamentalists in the country, because I think of all the regulated prices, the fuel price is probably the most sensitive. And I completely understand why a government would regulate fuel prices in order to balance out a lot of the imbalances that would affect fuel prices and negatively impact people in remote and rural areas. And, you know, the kind of revolt in public as a response to the fuel prices is definitely something that we cannot deal with at the moment. So, yeah, the market fundamentalists are probably saying, told you so, told you so. But unfortunately, I don't think that, you know, deregulating completely is also a good choice in this situation.
It's not. Yeah.
Yeah. On that note, it takes us to the next story in the SA update. The World Bank approves a 7.6 billion rand loan to boost COVID-19 vaccinations in South Africa. And this is following South Africa having administered over 36.4 million COVID-19 vaccine doses, which puts us at about 50% of adults and 30% of 12 to 17-year-old adolescents being fully vaccinated. What are your thoughts on this one, Smo?
Oh, well, this one's here. I mean, the vaccination drive has ground to a slow trot. So I suppose most of these funds will be directed towards economic recovery after COVID-19, maybe to the health system, which needs those resources. And National Treasury does say, however, that the loan is part of government's efforts to cut debt service costs by using cheaper funding sources in its response to the pandemic. I have my reservations on this strategy, that it is not really a cheap funding source, because borrowing in foreign currency does not reduce debt service costs. The one and only consideration that they should have is the rate of exchange, because over the loan period, let's take the rand for an example. Since 2017 till now, in 2017 the exchange rate was 13 rand 30 to the dollar, to the US dollar. It is currently at 15 rand 36 on average to the US dollar. So that shows a depreciation of 15.5% on average over the term. So that is the real debt service cost. Even if you go to the IMF and they give you that loan at 1%, but it's the rate of exchange, the depreciation of the currency that matters. So, and what is also true is that this is the government of South Africa's broader financing strategy to access external financing from international financial institutions, as is contained in their economic reconstruction and recovery plan, which was tabled, which was also restated in this year's State of the Nation address. The truth now is that these loans, including those loans from the IMF, from the African Bank, are all part of the new World Bank Group Country Partnership Framework, something they call the CPF. They say this strategy is designed to offer a World Bank Group package of knowledge programs, primarily from the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and financing for private sector development by the IFC. And then there's also the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency for investments both in South Africa and cross-border into the rest of Africa. So this is an entire package called the CFP. Now, the CFP is the new structural adjustment program. It has been sanitized to sound as if it's mutually beneficial, as if it is aligned with South Africa's development and investment objectives of creating a sustainable, resilient, and inclusive economy, as they would theorize. It has all those, like I'm trying to say, all these nice sounding words like supporting cooperation, efforts to stimulate investment and job creation. But it's all the same. It's just another program that is meant to pour cold water over these simmering coals. I mean, if you know what happened with the structural adjustment program, this is the CPF and this strategy of getting external loans, external financing from these international financial institutions is just a bad idea in my view.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, look, we've been there so many times on this story, Spoo, and multiple times, even when the government was borrowing from the IMF and previous loans from the AFDB and the World Bank. I think for the kind of social spending that we're looking to do with these loans, it's much better to get local financing. And for me, the sadder part is that, unlike foreign direct investment, right, which comes with some level of expertise, etc., this money and loans are just going to government and not creating any kind of new jobs, no sort of new technologies being transferred, no new expertise coming, and not even internationalizing any of our domestic capital. And I think really at this point where South Africa is stuck in this sort of suboptimal low growth environment and slow growth as well as high unemployment, really, the only kind of solution that I see for me is SMME development and ensuring that you develop people's private capacity at a very micro level in order to then leverage that at a medium and small and medium enterprise level. But I think that's far too often not always the focus. The focus is on these huge government programs such as the basic income grant, etc., the social relief of distress grants, etc., which I think are not necessarily taking us anywhere forward. Really, it's more of a 2 steps forward, 3 steps back situation in my view.
Yeah. And so, just to add on, I mean, we ran the story of the 200 billion government guarantee during the COVID-19 pandemic that was supposed to go through banks, and only about 10% of that was used. I mean, imagine if 200 billion could be pumped into the economy and SMMEs, as you say, would benefit. The spin off, the multiplier effect. Imagine that. I mean, it's a massive injection to the economy. That's you've said it. Yeah.
On that note, it takes us to the last story in the essay update on the Foreign Affairs Minister concluding her Nordic roadshow. And the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation concluded ministerial visits to Finland, Sweden, and Norway from the 13th to the 17th of June. And the minister also participated in the 19th Nordic Africa Foreign Ministers meeting, which aimed at promoting peace and security, sustainable societies, the rule of law, youth and women, as well as enhancing African-Nordic multilateral cooperation. South Africa has received investments of approximately 335 billion rand from 63 Swedish companies with presence in the country. Meanwhile, there are 21 Norwegian companies present in South Africa, and the Nor Fund has invested more than 90 billion rand in government bonds. Spoo?
Yeah, developing relations with trade partners is always just a welcome. It's a good development, especially in a world that is becoming more multipolar. So these partners in the Nordic countries, I mean, Finland is not part of the EU as yet, so you're getting that. We must get a diversity of these partnerships and all, and with all the different benefits that come with that. Now, South Africa, as we have discussed in previous episodes, needs to move towards a more value-added goods and services, scientific services paradigm. I mean, we can't be just selling or we're giving these people what wine, oranges, and metals. Yeah, we can only. I mean, from the trade balances, it's clear that these Nordic countries, we only expect. I mean, from the trade balances, it is clear that we only export to them half the value of what we import from them, due to this primary nature of our offerings. I mean, we do have well-renowned and highly regarded education institutions, universities. We should be exporting more value-added services, I think. Again, this speaks to the previous story that we were talking about. Government is, I mean, these guys are investing in government bonds, and they're talking about the Nord Fund, the Nordic Fund, I suppose that's what it is, coming in to invest. I mean, our people are looking for this external finance. This I don't know why we need all of this when we have all the banks, all these financial institutions, and our banks are flush. We could be using our own finance, but so I don't know, this strategy. It bugs me a bit.
Yeah, no, definitely agree with you this, but I really can't add much there. But to say, look, the current environment we're in obviously is, well, I think as the Russia-Ukraine war progresses, capital markets will start to dry up, but we're still experiencing the last of those search for yields under the zero interest rate policy previously, at least prior to the current high inflation environment we're in. Obviously, as central banks start responding to the high inflation environment we're in, we'll start seeing the capital markets start to dry up. And I hope that hopefully then that will reorientate our government officials and our governments generally on the continent towards domestic financing, just mainly because it's more sustainable and actually much more developmental in terms of the impact. On that note, that brings an end to the essay update on this episode. And another reminder to our listeners, on whatever platform you're listening through, hit the like button, and if you're enjoying this episode, share it amongst your family and friends. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can keep up to date on all future episodes. On that note, that takes us to the Africa Regional Update. Again, quite a lot happening over the last month in the rest of the continent. And from the Africa Regional Update in brief, the AU Summit on Terrorism and Unconstitutional Changes in Government was held on the 28th of May, and the Central Bank of West African States increased its rates by 25 basis points on the 1st of June, and ECOWAS heads of state and government held an extraordinary summit on Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso on the 4th of June, and an attack on St. Francis Catholic Church in Owo, Ondo State in Nigeria left 50 dead and dozens wounded on the 6th of June, whilst the ECOWAS Regional Infrastructure Master Plan Sensitizing Workshop or meeting is being planned for the 23rd and 24th of June. On that note, that takes us to the first story in the Africa Regional Update, a security problem between the DRC and Rwanda. The chairperson of the African Union Commission has noted with concern that the relations between the DRC and Rwanda have deteriorated due to the insurgent groups and proxy conflicts happening in the eastern parts of the DRC. The AU chair called for dialogue, including processes led by the Conference of the Great Lakes region, as well as the East African Community as part of the package of solutions. There's been an increase in the number of attacks against civilians by the M23 armed group in North Kivu province in the DRC. And following attacks in the last weeks of May, 75,000 people have been internally displaced and another 11,500 people have fled to Uganda. And the United Nations Security Council has been urged to support efforts to end the insurgents by the Cooperative for Development of the Congo, the CODECO, M23, Allied Democratic Forces, the ADF, Red Tabara, and the Forces Democratic pour la Libération de Rwanda, the FDLR, which continue to pose a threat to national security in the DRC and the region. Sbo?
Yeah, man, this conflict should have been resolved at least a decade ago. I think the many players involved complicate the problem. You've got the forested border area where the rebels hide, and also make things more complicated that you've got such dense forests which are almost impregnable. Added to that is the security issues of at least 4 countries. The insecurity of the border region is not a matter of just the Congo and Rwanda alone. There's also the ethnic part of the long-standing conflict. More than 120 different militia operations have been documented in that region, some originating from Rwanda, but a number of these are also from Kinyarwanda speaking people from Eastern Congo, who are Congolese for all purposes, but they are also Kinyarwanda is a language spoken by both the Tutsi and the Hutu in Rwanda. Disarming all of these groups has proved to be very difficult. For example, the M23, which is largely an ethnic Tutsi group, is opposed to the government that came to power in the DRC back in 2012. And they have seized control of the city of Goma. The army, the DRC army and the United Nations forces, they did dislodge the M23 from Goma a couple of years back, and many of those rebels fled to Rwanda and Uganda before signing the 2013 peace agreement. So you've got all of these groupings, and you've got this ethnic background, this ethnic element to the conflict, and you also have Tutsi people also in Burundi, and you also got the Banyankole people in Uganda. That's the Tutsi element. There's all sorts of conspiracy theories going around in that Great Lakes area, where some people will be saying that the Tutsi people want to take over Central Africa and create this massive, Tutsi empire. So it's very complicated.
No, definitely. I think you've characterized everything very well, this Boo, and I think it's very complex. It's a tribal conflict, it's a border conflict, it's a whole lot put together. And we haven't even considered the impact of the proxy conflicts that are involved, right? On the one hand, there have been accusations that the Kagame administration of Rwanda has been funding the M23 for its operations against the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Meanwhile, Paul Kagame, or the administration, has blamed the DRC for funding the FDLR, which is the insurgents hiding from Rwanda in the North and South Kivu provinces. So, yeah, it's a very, very, very complex and challenging conflict. But my biggest concern is that there just is very little hope beyond sort of promotion of dialogue, and there's all these other geographic and military issues that make it almost impossible to either resolve via military means. But I don't think that a military response in itself is going to be sufficient, but it will definitely be necessary. There also needs to be a huge humanitarian response, because over all these years and millions of people being internally and externally displaced, livelihoods and for generations, I think, are definitely being destroyed in the process. And as you said, this conflict's been going on for well over 2 decades. So you already are talking about at least a generation and a half that's already been caught up in this already. So yeah, it's very concerning. And I really don't see any of the dreams we have as a continent, whether it's the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, etc., without the lights being put on in the DRC and, the country being able to benefit from its enormous wealth, but also its central position as a artery that connect, or the heart that connects the what would be the trade corridors, which are the arteries to the rest of the continent, is not going to function whilst the DRC is dysfunctional. At least the eastern parts of the DRC are dysfunctional the way that they are.
Yeah, just recently, if you remember, we ran a story about the DRC being incorporated into the East African community, and now Kenya is being roped in to come in and sort of like diffuse matters between Tshisekedi and Kagame, because Kagame is already beefing up his forces on the western side of Rwanda, and they are said to have been shelling Eastern DRC, and Tshisekedi, the DRC president, is also fuming on this other side. So I don't know. Really, we need to stop these wars. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think at some point we should probably consider having a special feature on this issue, just simply because the DRC, Eastern DRC conflict, as well as the Sahel conflicts, are always going to be the center of the discussion in terms of the political stability and development of the continent. On that note, that takes us to the next story in the Africa Regional Update on slow progress in Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Mali. So the ECOWAS heads of state and government held their extraordinary summit on Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso in Accra on the 4th of June, and the summit has made very little progress towards the adoption of agreeable plans to return to civilian rule in any of the countries that have decided. And instead, they've decided to maintain the sanctions imposed against Mali since January. Meanwhile, the summit has also failed to make good on its threats to impose sanctions against Burkina Faso and Guinea after the deadline of 25 April had passed without an agreed upon transition plan. On the 11th of June, an assault in the town of Seitanga in Burkina Faso left at least 79 people dead following a jihadist attack on the 9th of June, which killed 11 military police. Meanwhile, in Mali, Mali has decided to withdraw from the G5 Sahel group and its joint force, which is supposed to provide security or at least calm the issues of insurgency and ISIL in the Sahel region.
There are evolving tactics of these terrorist groups. They keep coming with new tactics all the time. And to hear of 79 people mowed down is just harrowing. I mean, the African Union Commission and the United Nations Secretariat keep on talking about strategic assessment of security and governance initiatives in the Sahel, but nothing seems to be bearing any fruit. I mean, even this G5 Sahel grouping is, it looks like it's tearing apart at the seams. So yeah.
Yeah, look, I can imagine also it must have been difficult after the pullout and re-engagement that France made after it decided to pull out its troops from the Sahel and then backtracked on that decision. I think it's the same sort of situation that Afghanistan found itself post the pulling out of the US, and I think that's really the only thing that made them backtrack on that decision. But I think without that military support and other financial support from France and other development partners, really the response in the Sahel is really appalling, to say the least, because these countries on their own just do not have the kind of military might in order to respond. And seemingly the frustration has also spread into the public's perception, and hence you had issues such as the coup in Burkina Faso, which had popular support, even though it was a military coup in response to the ineffective response by the former government in responding to some of these terrorist attacks. But it's very concerning that, these three flashpoints on the continent, I think there are four now: the Sahel region, Ethiopia to some extent, Mozambique in Cabo Delgado to some extent, and definitely the Eastern DRC, are really what's holding us back in terms of peace on the conflict on the continent, because a large part of the conflicts elsewhere have actually died down, well, with the exception, I think, of the fifth hotspot, which is, I think, Nigeria and the West Africa region, given the presence of Boko Haram. But I think by and large, the other kind of civil conflicts that we have, with the exception of Ethiopia, we kind of have passed that. We're now dealing with a new kind of conflict, which is terrorist-based, and I think taking advantage of the difficult socio-economic context we're in the post-COVID world on the continent.
Yeah, and it looks like they are targeting these underdeveloped areas, areas that are far-flung areas. I mean, if you look at Mozambique, it's up north, and if you look at the Sahel and you look at Eastern DRC, there's little to no infrastructure, and the towns are small, and the populations are illiterate, and it's these underdevelopment is the
Definitely.
underpinning thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think I've said this before and I'll say it again. Historically, we used to think that the conflict on the continent is what's leading to our underdevelopment, due to the impact of the conflict in destroying infrastructure, etc. But I think now it's actually the lack of development that's making us conflict prone, funny enough, or ironically. So yeah, we're definitely entering a new era, and very concerning. We need to definitely resolve the crisis that we have. And I think, given that there's some few hotspots, all I think it takes is some political will and a very effective strategy in order to respond to these conflicts.
Definitely.
On that note, it takes us to the last story on the Africa Regional Update on the Heads of African Regional Communities meeting in Tanzania. The second coordination meeting of the heads of regional economic communities was held from the 4th to the 7th of June in Arusha, Tanzania, and the meeting discussed strategies to improve the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area by drawing lessons from the regional communities, free trade areas, and customs unions. And negotiations on the rules of origin have been concluded for 87.7% of the tariff lines, whilst currently 43 out of 55 African countries have ratified the Continental Free Trade Agreement. Only 46 have actually submitted tariff offers to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, and this represents 85% of the African Union membership.
Yeah, for starters, I like the insistence on regional economic communities. I mean, these heads must meet. I mean, I think that's the way to go. You get these regional blocks to come in and, implement or even just start talking. I mean, if whatever solutions have been implemented in the regions can go on to the bigger scale, the the continental thingy. So it is true also that interconnectivity across Africa is crucial if the continent is to exploit its vast potential for industrialization, for trade and investment. Now, infrastructure development is the cornerstone towards achieving this. I am therefore amused at the contradictory statement that integration and trade, at least in the early phases, will be private sector driven. I had to read that twice. I mean, I can see that the thinking is leaning towards the PPP model, that is the private public partnership model. I mean, it's a more, most people like it. I mean, let me not say most people. I mean, free market fundamentalists like this model, but it has proven to be very expensive. It's an expensive way of delivering infrastructure. We know this in South Africa. We had the Gauteng, what is called the e-tolls now, the highway thingy, and it was expensive. It's a very expensive model. I mean, even now, I read, I think a week ago, about uh, it, the West African. There's that highway. We did a story about this freeway that will be linking Ghana, Nigeria, blah blah blah. We're out in West Africa. They say that the cost is something like $15 billion, and Egypt did something similar. I mean, in terms of the magnitude of the project, and it cost them $4 billion. So you can imagine all of that difference. I mean, all of these partners, when you have private, they want a share, they want a big slice of the profits. But anyway, I'm also again slightly disappointed that we are concentrating on trade facilitation measures, which will, I mean, things like cutting red tape and reducing tariffs and simplifying customs. These are these are okay. I mean, that's the way to go, but not at this early stage. To me, these are efficiencies that they're talking about. We can tackle those a bit later. The main thing is to get the bridges built, the roads built,
Yep.
the power lines built,
Yep.
and you need a public sector driven initiative. You need these regional blocks. You need the governments to talk to each other and to finance these, come up with guarantees if that if that is what is needed. But you have to get the major infrastructure built first, and then you start talking about efficiencies. Yeah.
I definitely agree with you there, Spo. I do think that the approach we're taking on this, I think, is building the plane as we're trying to fly it. And it might be a result of where we are in terms of the continent and the, being far left behind, etc., and we're needing to catch up. But I definitely think we're lacking, at least in terms of being able to put together concrete plans and put resources to these plans. Because it's one thing to come up with a plan, but to not put your own resources, your money where your mouth is, you're just as good as someone wishing upon a star and hoping that, they'll be able to find a golden goose at the end of the rainbow or whatever it might be.
Precisely. I mean, look at Africa now. It is we're not talking about the sovereign debt crisis that Africa is facing, and this is mainly because we get all of this external funding to come in. I mean, we might be looking at the worst a Sri Lanka case. I mean, we were talking about Rwanda just now. If they will be financing a war against the DRC, how will they be paying their debt? Because all that growth that you see in Rwanda is through external debt. I mean, we've gone to the World Bank and we've asked them to hold back on our repayments because Africa is struggling because of all of this external debt. I mean, we have to get all those resources. Anyway, we keep on talking about this financing bit on this show, but it's critical that we sort out development finance.
Yeah, no, definitely. Look, I used to think that Africa is being held back because we just don't have the capital domestically to develop ourselves. But when I look at stories of regions, I think of the West African Francophone region, for example, or the Central African Francophone region, which has had a fixed exchange rate with the euro through the French National Treasury arrangement since the 1940s. Are you telling me that over all these decades we haven't been able to import the capital we need in order to develop ourselves? No. I think it's that financing story and really the kind of decisions that countries are making that's going to be the decider as to, are we actually going to realize this African dream or not?
Yes.
On that
That's
note,
true.
that brings an end to the Africa Regional Update for this episode. And that takes us to the numbers game. All right, so our number for this episode's boo is $131 billion. What do you think this number is related to?
When I looked at the number and I thought, no. I tried multiplying it by 15 and it's a big number.
I'm back. Because for the past few episodes, you've been cracking all these numbers riddles that I've been putting together. So I'm glad I finally got you off guard this month. So yeah, let me get straight into it. So the number this episode is actually the ECOWAS Regional Infrastructure Master Plan aims to achieve investment of $131 billion. So ECOWAS is actually organizing a sensitization meeting on the ECOWAS Regional Infrastructure Master Plan, which is going to be held in Accra, Ghana from the 23rd to the 24th of June. And the ECOWAS Regional Infrastructure Master Plan includes 145 investment projects, which includes 56 soft projects such as technical studies, project prep activities, institutional reform, etc. And the investment projects in the master plan include 92 energy projects, 48 transport projects, 5 ICT projects, all estimated at a value of $131 billion over the period 2020 to 2045. So there you have it. We've got a plan. This is the bridges and the power stations that we need to build. But again,
yes,
we're putting out the begging bowl to the rest of the world for the $131 billion.
And we will go to China and we'll try to go to the West, and they'll come fighting over. I mean, we'll bring in another Cold War onto ourselves. Anyway, but yeah, it's interesting though. I like I really like this plan. I mean, this is a real master plan. I mean, this is what the Africa trade, the free continental thing should be thinking about. You should be putting in numbers to say, this is what we need: a road from here, a railway line from here to there. This is how much it will cost. And that's that way you're building something, you're doing something.
Yeah. Look, in as much as I can critique our approach, I don't think that the alternative of exclusively depending on domestic capital is going to work for us, just simply because there's certain expertise we don't have in these mega infrastructure projects. But what I'd like to see more often being done is to carve out a 5 to 10 or 15% for the international investment partners, whilst the bulk of the investment should actually be coming from domestic resources. And we definitely still need to leverage from the rest of the world in terms of expertise, etc. But I definitely think that they should form a minority contribution in terms of our internal plans to develop ourselves.
Precisely.
On that note, it brings an end to the episode this month.